Hi, Kenny. You're talking to Jim and
Hi, how
Matt.
are you?
So good.
Good
It was a
afternoon.
great day.
Thank you for putting me on.
Thank you for calling.
Yeah.
What would you like to talk about today?
All right. Well, what I told the call screener, first of all, I just want to find out, is the call screener one of your tech people?
No, I don't. I don't know who screened you, so I don't know.
Oh, okay.
We can't see.
Well, anyway, I just want to put kudos out for the tech people if it was, because there's a female voice and only one female tech person, so I thought I knew who I was talking to. But anyway, the people you don't talk a lot about are the people that screen the calls, and I think the people that screen the calls do a real good job.
You're
Well,
absolutely
thank you.
right.
We,
And if you
we
feel
agree
as though,
completely.
yeah, if you feel as though we don't talk about them enough, that's something that we should take on board. We call everybody out, all of the volunteers at the beginning, including the call screeners. But you're absolutely right; they're tireless, and all of our volunteers are amazing. And I say that because Jim and I are also volunteers, and I think that we're amazing too. So, go ahead, Kenny.
Well, I'm real happy. This is the first time I think I've called in that you two are on the show, either one of you, and so
that's pretty. Well, it's not my first time on the show. It's our first time together.
Okay. And well, I agree with you, Jim, that all software and hardware sucks. If you actually did say that,
all software sucks. All hardware sucks. People make mistakes. Is the entire phrase that I use. Yes.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that's true. Well, I'm going to try to make as few mistakes as I can on this. I ran across something kind of accidental, like it seems like everything that exists, its opposite also exists. Would you agree with that?
Well, let me ask you this question. No. What's the opposite of my glasses? These exist. What's the opposite of them?
Right.
The opposite of your glasses?
They exist.
Well, I'd have to look it up in the dictionary. The opposite of the glasses you wear, I'd have to look it up because this could be very tricky sometimes.
Well, so if you're simply going with semantics, if you're simply going with semantics, I'm not going to accept that as definitions as evidence.
Okay, yeah. So if matter exists, you don't necessarily think it follows that antimatter must exist.
Not without evidence, no. There is evidence that antimatter exists, but...
Well, I thought it was kind of universally accepted that if something exists, its opposite always exists. I just thought that was...
I don't think so.
Well, I think you're having a little bit of problem with language, because when you say anything, and I point out my glasses... You said you'd have to go look at a dictionary to find out what the opposite of glasses were, but that is simply word definitions. That's not really evidence of anything physical. So if we do know that antimatter exists, and it seems like it should be the case, if I understand the science correctly, and I may not, that antimatter should also exist. And there's kind of some confusion as to why there isn't as much matter and antimatter in the universe. But that is not the same thing as everything that exists has something that's opposite of it, right?
Right. Well, okay. What would you two define? Thank you. I appreciate that. What would you guys define as a coherent definition? What do you mean by a coherent definition? You don't mean universally accepted. You mean something else, don't you?
Well, no. So there's different ways we can use the word everything. And you can use the word everything to mean glasses, or you could use everything to mean matter, which glasses are made of, in any matter. So that's why I'm somewhat could think that your definitions are a little off, or the way that you're using words is a little off. And we just need to make sure that we all understand what you're talking about when you say everything that exists has something that is opposite. If what you mean is matter, then we can say if matter exists, then antimatter also exists. But and that's fine, but we should say that instead of everything, because everything, that just gets me back to my glasses example again, right? So we just need to make sure that we're all using the language the same way.
Do you believe that there's a possibility of a good case for an opposite of the universe existing, or the opposite of cosmos existing?
I don't know. I know there are people who postulate that multiverse theory. I am not exactly up on that. But yeah, I mean, it's possible.
If I were to define God as the only thing created and everything else, I mean, God is the only thing that's uncreated and everything else is created, would everything else compose the cosmos?
I don't know. You're making the definitions.
And I don't see the connection on like, are you saying like, would God have an opposite too? Like, what would that be? What's anti-God?
Do you have a word that describes everything that does exist?
The universe.
Yeah, potentially the universe. Okay. Well, what about the cosmos? Isn't that an extension of the universe that may include multiverses or whatever that might have caused?
Yes, that is correct. Yes. Yes.
Okay. So cosmos, if that's the sum total of that which exists, then I can define God as, if I define that as created, I can define God as the uncreated, and we've got some sort of definition of God, don't we?
Oh, I think I see what you're saying. I get what you're angling at. You're just saying that you're setting out the groundwork by saying if everything that does exist has an opposite, like you want us to agree to that premise, and then once we agree to that premise, you can parlay from that premise to say, well, the universe encompasses everything, so that is everything that exists. Right. So you define it as created, but then what's the opposite of created?
Uncreated.
So God's uncreated. So that's what you're thinking, is that God's uncreated, but also everything that exists. So I guess I could use your same line of argumentation and say that the opposite of that is doesn't exist.
Non-existence or non-being, I guess, would be
non-existence. Everything that exists, if there has to be an opposite, then the opposite of that would be doesn't exist. Right. So following your own line of logic, that's saying I accept it, I'm not sure that I do, because I'm not sure it's parsed out fully well. But even if I did accept it, it doesn't follow that it would necessarily lead to a God. It could actually necessarily lead to the opposite. Just depending on how you use language.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Everything that exists, there needs to be an opposite of existing, and that's what? Non-existence.
Right.
But it's all in how you defined it. It's semantics. So if you define it as created, then the opposite of that is uncreated, right? But first you have to define it as created. We don't have any proof that it's created. You need the assertion that it's created in order to even get there. We don't need that assertion, though. One thing we do know for sure is that it exists. So what's the opposite? No, because the only thing that we know for certain is that it exists. That's the only thing we know for certain. We need to insert your assertion that it was created in order to get to the opposite. So without inserting your assertion, the only thing that we know for certain is that it exists. So if we accept your premises, the exact opposite, the antithesis of that is non-existent. So following your line of logic, God can't exist unless you insert an assertion that the universe itself was already created, which is a presupposition for God. So you're actually making the question by even making the argument to begin with, and the rest of it is just kind of a song and dance.
I get it. Now, I was trying to remember what my next point was going to be.
I'm a nightmare for that. I ruin everything.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's not fruitless to listen to you. Let's see.
Oh, it might be.
Well, I want to discuss
the opposite of me is delightful.
That's not true. Sorry. That's not true, Shannon. All right. So, Kenny, what was your point?
Okay. Anyway, I wanted to try to discuss something more on a spiritual level or spirit level or God level, and try to get a ground where we could agree with that to discuss it. I actually wasn't trying to do a gotcha premise. I was trying to open a door. What I've been trying to do since I've been calling on this show, I guess 3 or 4 times in the past 5 episodes, is trying to establish the possibility that, actually a strong possibility that spirit or spiritual is something that's real, that exists, because we humans so many of us are engaging in that which we would call spiritual or spirit. And, the majority of the people in the world are spiritual in the sense that they transcend themselves to find meaning and purpose in life.
Can I interrupt you for real quick? So what do you mean by spirit and spiritual, and what does it mean to transcend oneself? So you can pick any one of those three. I would like to start with spirit and spiritual, but that's okay.
Okay, well, if I'm imagining a pond with streams, and most of the time when with ripples in it, a calm pond with ripples in it, that's obviously something I've seen before, because we don't usually have these images in our head that we've, unless we have seen something very similar. But you imagine that, but your imagination of that is not necessarily, it's not something that's immaterial that doesn't exist because it's in your memory, but it's outside of yourself. And so you develop a sense of calmness by meditating on that pond with ripples. So it's a real pond with ripples. It affects you spiritually. It might even, if you're a tree hugger and trees excite you or birds or something, you might even have an oxytocin experience. So what I'm saying is that when we can trigger all this stuff, and we can have what people usually call a spiritual experience by going outside or transcending ourselves rather than...
I don't know what outside or transcending myself means, though. I mean, outside of myself...
Then it means going outside yourself. I mean, do you ever think about something outside yourself? I mean...
You're talking about proximal and distal stimuli.
Yeah. I think about the computer in front of me. That's outside myself. My cell phone's outside myself. So again, I don't know what you mean by outside myself.
Okay. You operate computers, right?
Yeah, sure do.
Okay. You operate computers. You're in the computer business or the computer field or something, and you operate computers. Does that give you any fulfillment in life, being involved in that career or that thing that you're involved in?
Yeah, I enjoy it. Yes.
Okay, spiritual to me isn't a mystical upper story thing that I just can't get. What spiritual is just something that it can be anything outside of myself. You can be spiritual about anything outside of it.
I don't get outside of... How's my enjoyment outside of myself? Shannon's going to explode here in just a second.
I don't believe for a second that anything spiritual to me is purely outside of myself, and I don't have an imminent experience with it if it's meaningful to me at all. It's subjective and objective. I think all reality is always objective and subjective if it's real to me.
You're talking about the connection between imagination and emotion.
Okay, Shannon, go ahead. Go ahead. You're about to explode, and I was going to run an experiment to see how long it would take before you did, but I can't do that.
The answer is now. The answer is now. Okay, so you're talking. You talked about how internal images are constructed, right? So when you're talking about how internal images are constructed, you reference that you need to have some sort of experience, but we can actually use our imagination to create like aggregates. Things like chimera, for example, are aggregates of previous experience, and we can use what we know about perception to create whole cloth new things like that. That's why fantasy exists, right? That's why like creatures that exist in our imagination don't exist in real life, is because we have imaginative capabilities, but usually they have some sort of attributes that relate to things that we know, right? So you don't actually have to recall one-to-one something that you've experienced, like when you're thinking about your stream. And in fact, when you're thinking about your stream, your reconstruction of that stream also isn't one-to-one. So you've had an emotional connection to something that you find calming or soothing. And when you recall that, you reinstitute that emotional experience by virtue of the recall. And when you enter into a meditative state, you're again placing yourself in that experience via your memory, which activates your emotional centers, which if you have a priming mechanism like spiritual experience to relate to that emotional state, then you will relate that emotional state cognitively to a spiritual experience. If you don't have that as a prime, so if you don't relate these sort of meditative states that bring you happiness or contentment or calm to spiritual experiences, you will almost indefinitely relate it to something else. You'll just relate it to the emotional state itself. You'll attempt to elicit it for the sake of the emotional state. But if you have the additional level of priming and framing that relates it to that spiritual experience, then you'll make that connection. So just saying that people have spiritual experiences is really only evidence that people who are primed to affiliate emotional states with spirituality will affiliate emotional states with spirituality, and that would be anticipated and expected. Okay, I'm done now. You can go back. I'm so
okay. Well, good.
Sorry.
I saw how excited you were before you got a chance to talk.
I almost hyperventilated.
Because I'm watching a silent movie in front of me while I'm watching, but there's a delay, and so I'm seeing you clicking your nails and everything, going, "Boy, I wish you'd be quiet because I really want to interject right here."
I did. It was so good. Sorry, but go ahead. Go ahead. But I just don't think that you could just you can't relate that directly to, you can't say because people have spiritual experiences and it happens en masse, that means that there's some sort of God. Because en masse, like most of the population has some sort of religious affiliation just by virtue of like where they're born, how they're brought up, and to a certain degree, the way that humans anthropomorphize things and look for answers and are pattern recognition machines. So it would go without saying that people who are born in spiritual environments, who are primed to interpret experiences as spiritual, who are told that a God exists, would relate emotional experiences to spirituality given the opportunity when they're told that that's going to be the case. That doesn't prove God exists. That just proves that humanity has built this infrastructure of cognitive bias that teaches us how to make relations when we're having experiences. So it's not really proof for anything except for what we learn, how we operate as a species, and the fact that it's predicated under and couched within societal standards and interaction standards, and that's basically it. It leads to nothing else to me except for an outcome that would be anticipated, especially since once people leave religion, like I've left religion, for example, I still have those contemplative experiences, but they're no longer registered as spiritual because now I've deconstructed that priming. So now I have the same sort of experiences, except for I have this experiences for their own sake, as opposed to having those experiences and feeling as though I need some sort of external source to give me those experiences, or that they're somehow related to some sort of external force. Instead, now I have the control over knowing how to elicit them. And I do it of my own accord for my own reasons, and that's actually a better way to enter meditative states, because if you're anticipating that it might be spiritual, for example, and then you don't have something that you would relate to cognitively as a spiritual experience, that's ultimately potentially detrimental. Like there's lots of ways you could talk about this, but you can't just assert it as, well, people have experiences and they describe them as spiritual, thus God, because people also attribute them to myriad gods. Which one?
Okay. Well, maybe you can help me understand an experience I had, but it's very brief. It's not a real complicated one or anything.
2 minutes.
Hang on.
We gotta go.
Here it is. I'm Eastern Orthodox. We have a thing called chrismation, and it's not a separate sacrament or mystery of our church like it is in the Roman Catholic Church that differentiate everything because they're Western and we're very Eastern. And when you're chrismated, you're anointed with oil, and it's following the stuff in James 2:7 and 1 John 2:27 that you're anointed, that no man outside the faith can teach you the faith or whatever, that you've got a spiritual illumination that has confirmed it in you, and it goes along with being sealed by the church in the Holy Spirit. We actually have a during that chrismation, the church pronounces sealed. Everyone says sealed each time we're anointed with oil on our eyes or ears and everything, and sealed, our body sealed. But get that out of the way. I'm talking too much about that. My point I want to make is that there's a book called The Way of Orthodoxy that I did not understand on Saturday prior to my chrismation. I was chrismated, I believe, the 15th of 15th of September 2011 on Sunday, the Sunday of Elevation of the Cross. And when I was chrismated that Sunday, the very next day when I picked up that book, I really got it.
Did somebody tell you that you wouldn't get it until after your chrismation?
Understood it.
Right. Did somebody tell you that you wouldn't understand it until after your chrismation?
Oh, gosh, no, absolutely not. The book was never discussed.
It wouldn't necessarily matter either. It could be you internally having some sort of epiphany related to your affiliation with the chrismation, because it sounds like there was a lot of priming behaviors and rituals involved as well. Like you said, there was anointing, and then there was repetitive call and response. Anointing and repetitive call and response are group activities that are used to put people into like sort of like trance or meditative states. And if this was something that you felt would be a spiritual awakening, you affiliated with a spiritual awakening, you were going through the rituals related to it, your understanding of the book may have been, relatively similar to what it was before. However, now the scaffolding for your schema related to that book was imbued with your perception of your new spiritual endowment. And by virtue of your perception that you had a new spiritual endowment, you altered your perception of how you see the book. So now when you view the book, you view it through the lens of assumption that you now have a form of spiritual endowment that you didn't have prior. And by virtue of you having that assumption about yourself, you see the book differently and relate to it differently because you were primed to.
Okay, so you're saying could I have been primed to have more confidence in my ability to understand the book?
You were primed to, definitely you were primed to think that you were having a spiritual awakening. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Do you deny that?
Told before that. I was definitely told before that this is an illumination, but I wasn't told that I would necessarily, I was specifically told, you may don't expect warm and fuzzies. You may not feel any different afterwards.
Yeah.
But I
so that they can couch disappointment, so that people don't slide back if they don't have the affirmation. Okay. You gave yourself an affirmation potentially, Kenny.
Okay.
And then you looked at that circularly as proof. You gave yourself affirmation and then said, me having a different perspective on something after having an experience that I was told was likely going to give me a different perspective. I can see why it would be compelling. I can certainly see why it would be compelling, especially since it is personal and it happened to you. But from an external perspective, I can make sense of it very easily without the awakening actually doing anything aside from putting you in a different psychological state than you were prior and looking to potentially fulfill that psychological state, even unconsciously, or relating to things that had to do with your religion differently as a result of you seeing yourself as imbued with this religious and spiritual awakening that you were anticipating.
Is it possible that I became more spiritual as a result of this, as we define it in the Orthodox Church?
It's possible that you perceive yourself as more spiritual. Absolutely. Of course it is.
No. Well, I mean, I actually understood things in the church a lot better. There's definitely, because it's Eastern, I'm a very Western, intellectual, scientific kind of guy. I love philosophy and stuff. Mm-hmm. I've gone into, to be totally transparent to you, I've been a martial artist, and I really do understand Far Eastern religions and philosophy and stuff. But that's not Near Eastern Christianity of Antioch, Syria, and Jerusalem. I mean, this is definitely a different critter than what the Roman Church puts out.
Right.
We believe that
but Kenny, I just want to stop you for 1 second. We do have to go, but I want to put a bug in your ear before you go. I have heard this myriad times, not about your religion, but others, because other people had similar sort of awakenings that resulted in them approaching their relationship or understanding of their religion differently, but they were different religions. Are their experiences that mirror yours, Are they false and only yours is true? Or is it possible that they're all cognitively explainable and that because yours happened to you, it's personal, so you're more invested in trying to justify it?
Well, I don't think necessarily that another enlightening experience or nirvana type thing or anything like that of another religion would help them understand Orthodox book.
No. Helps them understand their religions.
I believe it took I believe that it's an Orthodox experience that helped me understand an Orthodox thing.
Okay. I am going to let you go because I'm not certain you fully understood my question, but I'll let you listen back to it. And we are over time at this point. And I appreciate your call. You were lovely to talk to. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.